Marcus Hayes, at 39 years old, with an annual salary of $61,000 as a senior HVAC technician, understood the physics of cold. He knew how it crept through single-pane glass, how it found the smallest cracks in a door frame, how it settled deep into a person's bones. He did not expect to be studying its effects from the driver's seat of his own 2015 Honda Accord, parked in the driveway of the house he co-owned on Christmas Eve. The temperature display on his dashboard read a brutal 28 degrees. His wife, Denise, had delivered the news with the casual dispassion of a flight attendant announcing a delay. "My parents are taking the guest room," she'd said, not looking up from her phone, "and Mom's been having trouble with her back, so I told her she and Dad could have our bed. The couch is just too lumpy." Marcus had stood in the hallway of their Ardmore home, the scent of pine from their 7-foot, $150 Christmas tree filling the air. He could hear her father, Harold, laughing in the living room, a booming, arrogant sound that always seemed to take up too much space. "Okay," Marcus said slowly. "So, where do I sleep?" Denise finally looked at him, her brow furrowed with impatience, as if he were a particularly slow-witted child. Her elegant twists, which he'd always loved, seemed to frame a face he no longer recognized. "I don't know, Marcus. Figure it out. The car is heated, isn't it?" The suggestion was so outrageous, so utterly devoid of warmth or partnership, that he couldn't form a response. He just stared. A few minutes later, as he was grabbing a spare pillow and a comforter from the linen closet, Harold appeared. He was a tall, imposing man whose expensive clothes, tonight a $900 cashmere sweater, hung loosely on a frame that had gone soft with a life of leisure. He was holding a thin, cheap-looking blanket, the kind you might find in the trunk for emergencies. It was probably a $15 item from a discount store. Harold pushed it into Marcus's hands. His expression wasn't one of malice, but something far worse: complete and utter indifference. "Here," he said, his voice smooth and low. "Heard you were roughing it tonight." He gestured with his chin toward the driveway. "The car probably fits your budget better anyway, Marcus." The words landed like stones. "Fits your budget." The phrase echoed in the frozen air of the hallway, a perfect encapsulation of 10 years of marriage, of 1,000 tiny cuts, of the vast, unbridgeable gulf between his world and theirs. He was the man who fixed things, the man with grease under his fingernails and a steady, reliable paycheck. They were people of taste, of status, of a phantom wealth that had evaporated years ago but left behind its expensive, demanding ghost. And the most brutal irony of all, the one that made the cold in his car feel like a physical assault, was that he was the one keeping their ghost alive. He was the guarantor on their $4,200 a month luxury apartment in Rittenhouse Square. He was the man whose signature, whose good credit, whose steady $61,000 a year income was the bedrock upon which their entire performance of affluence was built. He had facilitated access to a $74,000 family fund that was supposed to be their bridge back to stability. Instead, it had become a slush fund for their egos, and he, the facilitator, was being sent to sleep in a car. He had no idea then, sitting in the freezing dark, that their casual cruelty had just handed him the very key to his own liberation. But a reckoning was coming, and it would arrive in a plain white envelope. We all have a story about a time we felt small. A moment someone tried to put a price tag on our worth. What's the most outrageous thing someone has ever said to you? Share your story in the comments below, because sometimes turning those moments into strength is the best revenge. The early years with Denise had felt like sunlight. He'd met her at a friend's barbecue in West Philadelphia. He was 29, just starting to build his reputation as a reliable HVAC guy. She was 27, working as an administrative assistant for a law firm, and she had a laugh that could make a whole backyard feel brighter. She was beautiful, with deep brown skin that seemed to glow and a sharp intelligence that challenged him. Her family, the Parkers, were from a different world, a world of debutante balls, generational memberships at the Marion Cricket Club, and a sprawling mainline home that had been in their family for a century. Marcus, who grew up in a tidy row home in southwest Philly, the son of a city bus driver and a school teacher, was intimidated, but also enchanted. He thought their differences were a strength. He was practical. She was a dreamer. He knew how to fix a faulty compressor. She knew which fork to use for the fish course. When they married, they bought a modest 3-bedroom, 2-bath house in Ardmore for $350,000. To Marcus, it was a palace. He spent his weekends landscaping the small yard, replacing the old water heater himself, and building shelves in the garage. He was building a life, a foundation. Denise's parents, Harold and Eleanor, had tolerated him with a kind of polite condescension that always left a bitter aftertaste. In their eyes, he was a project, a tradesman Denise had inexplicably chosen. At family dinners in their cavernous, museum-like home, Harold would ask him questions about his work with a detached curiosity, as if studying an interesting insect. "So, Marcus, you were in a crawl space today? Fascinating. Tell me, what does one wear for such an occasion?" The questions were always followed by a thin smile and a quick change of subject. The facade of their wealth was impeccable. Eleanor wore $2,000 Chanel suits to charity luncheons, and Harold drove a new $90,000 Mercedes S-Class every 2 years. Marcus felt the gap in their finances acutely. His most prized possession was his set of Milwaukee power tools, a $2,500 investment in his livelihood. His watch was an $89 Timex, reliable and unpretentious. Denise, caught between two worlds, began to drift toward theirs. She started buying $600 handbags and complaining about their starter home. "It's just so small, Marcus," she'd sigh after a weekend at her parents'. "Don't you want more?" Then, about 3 years ago, the facade had cracked. A series of bad investments Harold had made, which he'd always bragged about at the dinner table, imploded. The specifics were murky, wrapped in layers of shame and denial. But the result was catastrophic. The mainline house was sold to cover the debts. The Mercedes was repossessed. Suddenly, the Parkers, who had never worried about a bill in their lives, were functionally destitute. It was during this crisis that Marcus, in a moment of genuine compassion, stepped in. A distant aunt of Eleanor's had left a trust fund, a sum of just over $100,000. It was tied up in legal complexities that Harold, in his pride and panic, couldn't navigate. Marcus, with his methodical, practical mind, spent weeks on the phone with lawyers and accountants. He organized the paperwork. He figured out the tax implications. He managed to get the funds, a total of $74,000 after fees and taxes, released into a manageable account. He had done it to help, to see the relief on Denise's face, to finally prove his worth to her parents in a language they understood: money. They were grateful for a time, but their gratitude quickly curdled back into entitlement. They didn't want a sensible apartment in a quiet suburb. They wanted to maintain appearances. They found a stunning 2-bedroom apartment in a glass tower on Rittenhouse Square. The rent was a staggering $4,200 a month. "We can't afford that," Marcus had said to Denise, looking at the numbers. The $74,000 fund, meant to be a lifeline for several years, would be drained in just over a year on rent alone. "It's not we, Marcus. It's them," Denise had snapped. "And they need this. It's about their dignity. After the humiliation they've been through." The landlord for the Rittenhouse property, a large, faceless corporation, required a guarantor with sterling credit and a proven income. The Parkers had neither. All eyes turned to Marcus. Denise had presented him with the paperwork one evening. "It's just a formality," she'd said, her voice soft and persuasive. "The rent will be paid from their fund. Your name is just on the paper to get them approved. It won't cost you a thing." He remembered the weight of the pen in his hand. He remembered the little box next to the line, lease guarantor. He had trusted her. He had signed his name, pledging his own financial stability as collateral for their pride. He thought he was signing a document of support. In reality, he was signing his own sentence, underwriting the very lifestyle that would be used to humiliate him, culminating in a cold Christmas night in the car he was still making payments on. He was the silent, invisible engine powering their fantasy, and they didn't even have the decency to offer him a place on their couch. The cruelty didn't begin on Christmas Eve. It had been a slow, creeping rot for years. The loss of their fortune didn't humble Harold and Eleanor. It made them bitter and even more desperate to project an image of superiority. And Marcus was the most convenient target for that desperation. One Saturday, about 6 months after they had moved into the Rittenhouse apartment he was guaranteeing, Denise insisted they have her parents over for dinner. Marcus spent the afternoon cooking. He made his signature braised short ribs, a dish that took 5 hours of slow, careful work. He bought a decent $25 bottle of Cabernet Sauvignon. He wanted the evening to be pleasant. He wanted to feel like a family. Harold arrived, took one look at the bottle on the counter, and chuckled. "Cabernet," he said, drawing out the word. "How rustic." "Eleanor and I have been enjoying a lovely Bordeaux lately, a 2015 Chateau Margaux. It runs about $1,500 a bottle. But you can really taste the difference." He said it with a wink, as if letting Marcus in on a wonderful secret, but the message was clear. Your best effort is our pocket change. Throughout dinner, he peppered Marcus with questions about his job. "So, I have to ask," Harold began, delicately dabbing his mouth with a napkin, "when you're working on one of those large commercial units, on a rooftop in August, do you ever just look over the city and think, there's a whole world of finance and law and ideas down there that I'm not a part of?" Marcus felt the heat rise in his neck. "No, Harold," he said, his voice level. "I usually think about the hundreds of people in the building below who are counting on me to keep them from having a heat stroke. I think about getting the job done right." Eleanor, who had been silent, gave a tinkling little laugh. "Oh, Harold, stop teasing him. Marcus is very essential." She said the word essential like it meant unskilled. Denise just sat there, swirling the $25 wine in her glass, a pained expression on her face. She didn't defend him. She never defended him. Her silence was a betrayal all its own, a quiet endorsement of her parents' condescension. The insults became more frequent, more brazen. They began to treat Marcus not as a son-in-law, but as an unpaid handyman. One Tuesday, he got a frantic call from Denise. "Dad's new espresso machine is making a weird noise. Can you go over there? He's having guests tonight." Marcus was in the middle of a complex installation in a new office building downtown. "Denise, I'm on a job. I can't just leave. Tell him to call the manufacturer." He already did. "They can't send someone for a week," she said, her voice rising in panic. "His friends are coming over. It's a $3,000 Jura E8 machine, Marcus. He can't just serve them drip coffee." He felt a surge of white-hot anger. A $3,000 coffee machine, bought with the money he had secured for them, and he was being ordered to leave his own paying job to service it. "Denise, that's not my problem." "Some husband you are," she'd muttered before hanging up. He later found out she paid another technician $250 for an emergency service call, and then complained to Marcus for a week about the unnecessary expense he had caused. The humiliations were not just verbal, they were logistical. His 2015 Honda Accord became their unofficial city vehicle. They would borrow it for a day of shopping on Walnut Street, justifying it by saying parking their non-existent car in the city was a nightmare. One Friday, they returned it late, just as Marcus was getting ready to leave for a weekend fishing trip he'd been planning for months. The gas light was on. A new, deep scratch marred the passenger side door, and a half-eaten, greasy bag of expensive gourmet popcorn was crushed into the floor mat. "What happened to the door?" Marcus asked, his voice tight. Harold barely glanced at it. "Valet must have done it," he said dismissively, jingling the keys. "You should really think about getting a new car, Marcus. Something with a bit more presence." He didn't offer to pay for the gas, let alone the repair, which Marcus later found out would cost him $850 out of pocket. The final straw before Christmas came when he overheard Eleanor on the phone with one of her friends. He was in the garage, putting away his tools, and she was in the kitchen, her voice carrying through the open door. "Oh, it's just dreadful, Carol," she was saying. "We have to go to his family's for Thanksgiving. The house is the size of a postage stamp, and you can just imagine the food. Casseroles, darling. So many casseroles. One must endure, I suppose. It's for Denise's sake." He stood there, frozen, the cold metal of a wrench in his hand. His mother's sweet potato casserole, the one she'd been making for 40 years, the one that filled their small, loving house with the smell of cinnamon and warmth, was being mocked by a woman living in a palace he was paying for. Each of these moments was a stone laid on his chest. By the time Christmas Eve arrived, the weight was unbearable. When Harold looked at him with those dead, indifferent eyes and said, "The car probably fits your budget better anyway," it wasn't just an insult. It was the final, crushing stone. He walked out of the house, the cheap $15 blanket in his hand, and didn't look back. He sat in the driver's seat of his scratched, empty-tanked car, the engine running just for the weak warmth of the heater, and watched the happy, golden lights of the house where his wife was sleeping in a warm bed. And for the first time, he didn't feel sadness or anger. He felt a profound and terrifying nothing, a cold, clear, absolute void. The love he'd nurtured for a decade had finally and completely died. The night in the car was a descent into a new kind of reality. Marcus leaned the driver's seat back as far as it would go, the headrest pushing uncomfortably against the rear seat. He wrapped the thin polyester blanket Harold had given him around his legs, but it offered almost no protection against the invasive cold. The Honda's heater, even running full blast, could only do so much against the 28-degree air pressing in on all sides. Every 15 minutes, the engine would shudder as the thermostat kicked in, a reminder that he was burning through the last quarter tank of gas he couldn't afford to waste. He could see the house perfectly from his vantage point. The windows of the master bedroom, his master bedroom, were dark. Denise and her mother were presumably asleep in the $3,000 king-sized bed he'd spent a full Saturday assembling. Downstairs, the living room light was still on, a warm, inviting yellow that felt like a personal mockery. He could picture Harold in the leather armchair Marcus had bought, swirling a glass of expensive liquor that had probably been purchased with the fund money, feeling perfectly at home. At 1:17 a.m., a freezing rain began to fall. It wasn't a downpour, but a miserable, persistent ticking against the windshield and roof. Each tiny impact sounded like a judgment. Tick. You are not worthy. Tick. You are not welcome. Tick. This is what you get. He watched the raindrops freeze into intricate crystalline patterns on the glass, distorting the view of the house, making it look like a warped, unreachable dream. The world was sealing him out. He tried to sleep, but his body was rigid with cold and resentment. His mind replayed a decade of slights, a highlight reel of condescension. Harold's comments about his trade, Eleanor's pitying sighs, Denise's constant, silent complicity. He thought about his own parents in their postage stamp house in southwest Philly. He knew what was happening there right now. His father would be asleep in his favorite recliner, the TV muttering quietly. His mother would have been up late, wrapping last-minute gifts, her hands gnarled with arthritis, moving with practiced care. Their home, though small, was a universe of warmth and unconditional love. He could have been there. He could have been sleeping on their pull-out sofa, wrapped in a handmade quilt, waking up to the smell of his mother's coffee. But he had chosen this life. He had chosen Denise, and by extension, he had chosen this cold, lonely exile. Around 3:45 a.m., the cold became unbearable. His feet were numb, and a deep shiver had taken root in his spine. He couldn't stay in the car any longer. With stiff, aching joints, he opened the car door and stepped out into the freezing rain. He didn't try the front door. He knew it would be locked, both literally and figuratively. Instead, he walked around to the back of the house, to the small, unheated workshop he had built for himself in the corner of the garage. It was his sanctuary. It smelled of sawdust and oil and hard work. He had a small, battered armchair in the corner he'd salvaged from a client's curb. He sat down, pulled an old, grease-stained moving blanket over himself, and finally, as the first hints of a bleak Christmas dawn began to gray the sky, he fell into a fitful, dreamless sleep surrounded by the tools of the trade they so openly despised. Waking up a few hours later, stiff and unrested, he knew something fundamental inside him had shifted. The man who had walked out to the car last night was gone. In his place was someone colder, harder, and much, much clearer about what he had to do. January was a month of grim, silent routine. Marcus moved through his life like a ghost. He went to work. He fixed furnaces and heat pumps across Philadelphia, bringing warmth to other people's homes, while his own was frozen in a state of Cold War. He and Denise existed in the same space, but they were miles apart. They spoke only when necessary, their conversations limited to logistics. Do we need milk? The recycling goes out tomorrow. The emotional chasm between them was absolute. He played his part. He was tired, quiet, withdrawn. Denise seemed to attribute it to a prolonged sulk over the Christmas incident. "Are you ever going to get over it, Marcus?" she asked one night, her tone sharp with annoyance as she scrolled through Instagram on her $1,200 iPhone 14 Pro. "My mother has a bad back." It was one night. "I'm fine," he said, his voice flat. He wasn't fine. He was a machine, gathering data. He had become a strategist in his own home. The discovery happened on a Tuesday night, January the 28th, at 9:47 p.m. Denise was in the bath, and the house was quiet, except for the hum of the refrigerator. Marcus sat at their small, cluttered desk in the corner of the living room, a cheap $200 particle board assembly from IKEA, trying to make sense of their shared finances for the upcoming tax season. He was logging into their joint bank account when he decided to check his spam folder, a habit his meticulous nature demanded. There, nestled between an ad for male enhancement pills and a phishing attempt from a Nigerian prince, was an email with a subject line that made his blood run cold. Urgent. Second notice of arrears. 1801 Rittenhouse Square, Unit 14B. It was from the Prescott Group, the property management company for his in-laws' luxury building. His heart began to pound a slow, heavy rhythm against his ribs. He clicked it open. The email was curt and professional. It stated that the rent for Unit 14B was 2 months in arrears, for a total outstanding balance of $8,400. It warned of imminent legal action and eviction proceedings if the balance was not settled within 10 business days. But that wasn't the part that stopped his breath. Attached to the email was a PDF file, Payment _history _Hayes _guarantor. His hand trembled as he double-clicked the file. A ledger appeared on his screen. It detailed every rent payment made for the past 14 months. Each month, a payment of $4,200 had been made. But the payer column didn't list Harold or Eleanor Parker. It listed him. Marcus Hayes, guarantor. The payment method was a direct debit from a bank account he didn't recognize. He scrolled through his own records, his mind racing. The account number was for the trust fund he had helped them set up. The pieces clicked into place with sickening clarity. When Denise had him sign the guarantor forms, she must have also set up the payment structure. She had used the trust fund money but routed it through an account that was legally flagged under his name as the paying party. To the landlord, it appeared as though Marcus Hayes was the one personally paying their $4,200 monthly rent. For over a year, he had been the official, documented source of their lavish lifestyle. And now, the money in the trust had evidently run out, or they had simply stopped paying. The $74,000 was gone. And the Prescott Group wasn't sending threatening letters to Harold and Eleanor Parker. They were sending them to him. The default was legally his. The $8,400 debt was his. The potential lawsuit and credit score destruction were his. He had signed the papers as an act of love, of support. He thought he was a safety net. He saw now that he had been the floor they were standing on all along, and they had just danced their way right through it, leaving him to take the fall. He looked at the closed bathroom door, behind which his wife was soaking, oblivious. The feeling of nothingness he'd felt on Christmas Eve was gone. In its place was a single, pure, and diamond-hard objective: justice. He saved the PDF to a hidden folder on his laptop, closed the email, and went back to sorting household receipts, as if he had seen nothing at all. The game had changed, and Denise had no idea he was now playing to win. The days that followed the discovery were a masterclass in deception. Marcus transformed his grief and rage into a cold, impenetrable mask of normalcy. He became the perfect, unassuming husband, a man simply going through the motions. A little distant, perhaps, but fundamentally unchanged. Inside, he was a forensics expert meticulously building a case against his own life. Each lie Denise told was another piece of evidence. On Thursday, 2 days after he'd found the email, he was in the kitchen making coffee when she came in, phone pressed to her ear. "Oh, that's wonderful, Mom," she said, her voice bright. "A tasting menu at Vernick? You and Dad deserve it. You've been so careful with your budget." Marcus didn't flinch. A tasting menu at one of Philadelphia's most expensive restaurants could run $200 per person, a $400 indulgence for a couple supposedly 2 months behind on rent. He simply poured coffee into his $15 thermal mug, nodded a silent goodbye, and walked out the door to his truck. In the cab, before starting the engine, he took out a small notebook he now kept in his glove compartment. He wrote, January 30th, 8:15 AMD on phone with Eleanor. Mentioned Vernick tasting menu, $400 estimated. Claimed they are being careful with budget. Each entry was a brick in the wall he was building. He played dumb, but with purpose. That Saturday, while they were doing their weekly grocery shopping at the Ardmore Trader Joe's, he feigned a moment of concern. "Hey," he said, tossing a bag of frozen gyoza into the cart. "How are your folks doing with everything? Is that fun money lasting them okay?" Denise waved a dismissive hand, her attention focused on comparing 2 brands of organic kale. "They're fine, Marcus. They're being smart. Don't worry about it." "Good, good," he said, his voice laced with false relief. Because with that $4,200 a month rent, it must go fast. "I just worry, you know. Since my name is on the lease, too." He let the line hang in the air, a perfectly baited hook. She stiffened for a fraction of a second, her hand hovering over the kale. It was almost imperceptible, but he saw it. "It's fine," she repeated more firmly this time, grabbing a bunch of kale without looking. "I told you, it's just a formality. The account is fine." Lie number 2, he thought. He added it to his notebook later that evening, while she was watching a reality show on the $1,200 television he had bought for their living room. February 1st. 2:30 p.m. D claimed parents' finances are fine. Directly lied about the account status. His greatest performance came the following week. He knew he needed a physical copy of the original lease agreement he had signed. He was almost certain Denise kept important documents in a locked file box in their closet. One evening, he faked a stomach bug. A low-grade moaning affair that sent Denise to the pharmacy for Pepto-Bismol. "I just feel awful," he groaned from the couch. "My stomach is in knots." The moment her car pulled out of the driveway, he was off the couch. He went to his workshop and returned with a thin piece of metal, part of a lock-picking set he'd bought years ago out of professional curiosity. The lock on the $40 file box was cheap. It took him less than 90 seconds to open it. His hands moved with practiced efficiency. He sifted past their marriage certificate, car titles, his own life insurance policy. And there it was. Lease agreement. The Prescott Group. He quickly found the last page. His signature was there, bold and clear. And just above it the clause, circled now in his mind's eye, lease guarantor. The guarantor, Marcus Hayes, assumes full financial and legal responsibility for the terms of this lease, including but not limited to timely rent payment and the condition of the property upon vacancy. The guarantor is empowered to act on behalf of the lessees in any settlement or termination negotiations with the lessor. He took out his phone and, with hands that were surprisingly steady, photographed every single page of the 20-page document. He paid special attention to the signature page and the guarantor clause. He then photographed the payment authorization form Denise had filled out, the one linking the trust fund to his name as the payer. The evidence was irrefutable. She hadn't just let him sign as a guarantor. She had actively constructed the financial mechanism that funneled all liability directly to him. He put the papers back exactly as he had found them, locked the box, and was back on the couch, moaning softly, a full 10 minutes before Denise returned with the $8 bottle of pink medicine. As she handed it to him, her face a mask of mild concern, he had to fight the urge to laugh. She had no idea she had just been a pawn in his evidence-gathering mission. She was trying to soothe a stomach ache while he had just secured the ammunition to dismantle her entire world. The following Monday, Marcus took a personal day from work. He told Denise he had a dental appointment, a plausible excuse for a midday absence. His real destination was a modest 3-story brick building on a quiet street in Center City, far from the gleaming glass towers of the high-powered law firms Denise so admired. The name on the directory read, Alana James, Esquire, Tenant and Contract Law. He had found her online, drawn in by reviews that praised her as tough, no nonsense, and a fighter for the little guy. Her office was small and cluttered with files, not minimalist art. It smelled of old paper and strong coffee. Alana James herself was a sharp, perceptive black woman in her late 40s, with her natural hair styled in a crown of intricate, elegant locks. She wore a simple but professional $300 sheath dress and regarded him with intelligent, assessing eyes. Her hourly rate was $450, a significant expense for him, but he knew it was an investment he had to make. Marcus didn't waste time with emotion. He sat down and calmly laid out his evidence on her desk. A printout of the arrears notice from the Prescott Group, the payment history showing his name as the payer, and the photos of the lease agreement he had taken from the locked box. He explained the backstory, with the detached precision of a technician diagnosing a faulty system. He detailed the $74,000 fund, the move to the Rittenhouse apartment, the Christmas Eve humiliation. Alana listened intently, her fingers steepled under her chin. She occasionally nodded, her eyes scanning the documents he provided. When he finished, she was silent for a long moment. "Mr. Hayes," she said finally, her voice calm and firm, "first, let me say that what your wife and her family have done is unconscionable. Morally, it's a profound betrayal. But let's talk about what matters in this room, the law." She picked up the printout of the guarantor clause. "This is your prison," she said, tapping the paper, "and this is also your key. By signing as the sole guarantor, you made yourself 100% liable for the $8,400 in back rent and any damages. They can and will come after you for it. Your credit will be destroyed. They could garnish your wages." Marcus felt a familiar knot of dread tighten in his stomach. "However," Alana continued, leaning forward, "the same clause that gives you the liability also gives you the power. Read it again. The guarantor is empowered to act on behalf of the lessees in any settlement or termination negotiations." They made a critical mistake, Mr. Hayes. In their arrogance, they handed you the authority to negotiate the end of their own lease. They wanted your financial stability without any of your authority. The law, in this specific case, doesn't allow for that. A sliver of hope, the first he'd felt in months, cut through the cold fog in his mind. "So what do I do?" "We don't go to them," she said, her voice dropping into a strategic hush. "We don't go to your wife. We go directly to the landlord. The Prescott Group doesn't care about family drama. They are a corporation. They want two things: their money or their property. They would much rather have a new, paying tenant than a protracted legal battle with a non-paying one." The plan she laid out was simple and brutal. They would draft a formal letter. It would be from him, Marcus Hayes, the legal guarantor. The letter would offer a settlement. He would pay half of the outstanding arrears, a sum of $4,200, directly to them within 48 hours. In exchange, they would agree to an immediate, penalty-free termination of the lease agreement for Unit 14B. The tenants, Harold and Eleanor Parker, would be given a standard 30 days to vacate the premises. The remaining $4,200 debt would become their own personal liability, and the Prescott Group would be free to pursue it from them directly, a task that would be nearly impossible given their lack of assets. "You'll take a $4,200 hit," Alana said, looking him in the eye, "but you will be extricating yourself from a $50,400 a year liability. You will be saving your credit, and you will be severing the legal tie that binds you to their lifestyle. It's a clean cut." Marcus nodded slowly, the logic of it settling over him like a weighted blanket. But this time it was comforting, not crushing. $4,200. It was the price of his freedom. It was less than he'd spent on the scratch on his car and the endless, thankless gestures of support. "Let's do it," he said, his voice steady. For the next hour, they drafted the letter. It was cold, formal, and irrefutable. It cited the specific clauses in the lease, the history of non-payment, and the terms of his settlement offer. When it was done, Alana printed it on her official letterhead. At the bottom was a line for his signature. He picked up the pen. It felt different this time. The last time he'd signed a document this important, he had been a fool in love. Now he was a strategist executing a plan. He signed his name, the ink flowing dark and final onto the page. This signature wasn't an act of support. It was an act of liberation. The strike was planned with the precision of a military operation. Marcus knew he had to control the timing and the flow of information completely. The element of surprise was his greatest weapon. Alana had already communicated the settlement offer to the Prescott Group's legal counsel, who, as she predicted, had eagerly accepted. They wanted the problem solved. The termination agreement was signed and countersigned digitally within a day. All that was left was to deliver the news. He chose Tuesday, February 11th. He knew from Denise's calendar that her parents had their weekly brunch and gallery day. They would leave their apartment around 10:30 a.m. for a leisurely, $100 meal at a trendy bistro, followed by an afternoon of performative cultural appreciation in Old City. They would be away from the apartment, relaxed and unsuspecting. At 10:45 a.m., Marcus left the commercial site he was working on in University City, telling his foreman he had a family emergency. It wasn't entirely a lie. He drove his Honda, the same car he had slept in on Christmas, not to his home, but to a small post office on Sansom Street, just a few blocks from Rittenhouse Square. In his hands, he held a large manila envelope. Inside was a hard copy of the executed lease termination agreement and a cover letter he and Alana had drafted. The letter was addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Harold Parker, Unit 14B, 1801 Rittenhouse Square. He paid the $7.95 for certified mail with return receipt requested. The clerk assured him it would be delivered the following day. This was the physical blow, the undeniable, legally documented reality that would land in their mailbox. Then came the digital strike. At exactly 11:15 a.m., sitting in his truck parked a block away from their gleaming glass tower, he executed Phase 2. Alana had prepared an email. The subject line was simple: lease termination notice for 1801 Rittenhouse Square, Unit 14B. The body of the email was brief, stating that as per the attached, fully executed agreement with the Prescott Group, the lease for their residence had been terminated. It specified the vacate date, March 12th. The email was sent simultaneously to 3 recipients: Harold Parker's personal email address, which Marcus had retrieved from Denise's computer, Eleanor Parker's email address, and, for good measure, Denise's work email. He watched the sent confirmation flash on his phone screen. He imagined the email arriving on their devices as they were perhaps debating between the avocado toast and the eggs Benedict. He pictured the notification appearing on Denise's desktop computer at the law firm where she worked. He didn't have to wait long. At 11:17 a.m., his phone buzzed. It was a text from Harold. The screen lit up with the words, "What is this email? Is this a joke?" Marcus read the message and felt a profound, chilling calm. He did not reply. At 11:20 a.m., his phone rang. The caller ID showed Denise. He let the call go to voicemail, his heart beating a steady, rhythmic drum. A moment later, a notification popped up. New voicemail. He waited a full minute before playing it. Denise's voice was tight with confusion and rising panic. "Marcus, call me right now. My father is freaking out. He just called me from brunch. He got some crazy email from your lawyer. What did you do? Call me." He saved the voicemail. It was the first of what he knew would be many. At 11:30 a.m., his phone rang again. Denise. He rejected the call. The second voicemail arrived seconds later. Her voice was no longer confused. It was sharp, accusatory. "This isn't funny, Marcus. You can't do this. That is their home. My parents are on the street because of you. You signed those papers to help them, not to destroy them. What is wrong with you? You are supposed to be my husband." At 11:45 a.m., a text from an unknown number. He opened it. "This is Eleanor. I don't know what kind of sick, twisted game you're playing, but you are a cruel, heartless man. After everything we've done for you, after we welcomed you into our family, you will regret this." Marcus read the words, "welcomed you into our family," and a short, bitter laugh escaped his lips. Welcomed him. By making him sleep in a car. By mocking his job, his parents, his very existence. He put the phone on silent and placed it face down on the passenger seat. He took a deep breath. The air in the cab of his truck no longer felt cold and confining. It felt clear and open. He started the engine and drove back to his job site, the frantic buzzing of his silenced phone a distant, unimportant noise. He had a furnace to fix. He had work to do. The demolition was complete. Now came the quiet satisfaction of the aftermath. The consequences cascaded exactly as Alana had predicted, a series of dominoes toppling in perfect, inexorable succession. Marcus became a spectator to the unraveling of the world he had once propped up. First came the voicemails, an escalating symphony of their downfall. After the initial anger and confusion, denial set in. Voicemail number 3 from Denise at 1 p.m. was pleading. Okay, you made your point. You're angry about Christmas. I get it. I'm sorry. Now please call this lawyer of yours and undo it. You can fix this, Marcus. Just tell them it was a mistake. Then came the bargaining. Voicemail number 4 from Harold at 3:30 p.m. His voice stripped of its usual booming confidence. Marcus, listen to me. There's been a misunderstanding. This is about the $8,400, isn't it? We can figure that out. We can set up a payment plan. Just stop this eviction. Don't humiliate us like this. By evening, it had devolved into pure, unfiltered rage. When Marcus arrived home at 6:15 p.m., Denise was waiting for him. Her face was blotchy, her eyes red from crying. The moment he stepped through the door, she flew at him, not with physical violence, but with a torrent of words. How could you? She screamed, her voice raw. How could you be so vindictive, so evil? My parents are going to be homeless. They have nowhere to go. Marcus stood in the doorway, his work bag still on his shoulder. He felt strangely detached, as if watching a scene from a movie. He let her exhaust herself, his silence a wall she couldn't penetrate. When she finally paused to take a breath, her chest heaving, he spoke. His voice was quiet, devoid of heat. They are not my responsibility, Denise. They are my parents. And you are my wife, he said, the words falling like ice chips. The wife who told me to sleep in my car, in the freezing cold, on Christmas Eve. The wife who sat silently while her father told me my car fits my budget. Well, I've taken his advice. I'm adjusting my budget. He walked past her into the bedroom and pulled a pre-packed duffel bag from the closet. He had prepared for this. Where are you going? She asked, her voice suddenly small, frightened. I'm going to my parents' house, he said, turning to face her. To that little postage stamp house your mother finds so dreadful. I'm going to sleep on their couch, and I know for a fact I will be warmer and more welcome there than I have been in this house for a very long time. He paused, letting the weight of his next words settle. I've already spoken to Alana. She's drawing up the divorce papers. She'll be in touch. Denise's face went white. The collapse of her parents' world was one thing. The collapse of her own was a shock she hadn't anticipated. The consequences for the Parkers were swift and brutal. 1. The luxury lease. Terminated. The certified letter arrived the next day, a final, tangible seal on their fate. They had 30 days to vacate the $4,200 a month apartment. Their frantic calls to the Prescott Group were met with a corporate wall. They were directed to Marcus's lawyer, who politely informed them the matter was closed. 2. The debt. The $4,200 settlement Marcus paid cleared his name. The remaining $4,200 in arrears, plus penalties, became a personal debt attached to Harold and Eleanor. With no assets and now a pending eviction on their record, their credit was utterly destroyed. They couldn't lease another apartment in their own names, let alone a luxury one. 3. The humiliation. The news of their eviction spread like wildfire through their Rittenhouse social circle. The whispers at the charity benefits and cocktail parties were merciless. The Parkers, who had clung so desperately to the illusion of status, were now a cautionary tale. Their social death was complete. 4. The fallout. Homeless and destitute, Harold and Eleanor had no choice but to move in with Denise, crowding into the 2-bedroom house in Ardmore that Denise would soon have to sell as part of the divorce. The woman who couldn't bear the thought of a lumpy couch for her husband now had her parents sleeping in her guest room indefinitely. The financial and emotional burden was now entirely hers. 5. The divorce. The divorce was quick and uncontested. Denise, facing the reality of supporting her parents with her single, modest income, had no fight left in her. The house was sold, the assets were split, and Marcus walked away with his half, around $80,000 after everything was settled. Marcus never spoke to Harold or Eleanor again. His final conversation with Denise was a brief, sterile exchange at the lawyer's office. She looked tired and years older. The arrogant gleam was gone from her eyes, replaced by a dull resentment. She had made her choice, siding with the performance of wealth over the reality of partnership. And now she was living with the consequences, buried under the weight of the very pride she had so fiercely defended. 1 year later. The sun, a warm promise of spring, streamed through the clean kitchen window of a modest brick row home in Fishtown. At a simple wooden table, Marcus Hayes sat sipping his morning coffee. The air smelled of fresh paint and possibility. The house was small, only 2 bedrooms, and the $1,400 a month rent was well within his means. But it was his. A place of peace. A place of quiet dignity. The past year had been one of reconstruction. The divorce had been finalized quickly. The legal battle over the lease had ended the moment he'd sent that certified letter, though the $4,200 payment had been a bitter pill to swallow. It was the price of his freedom, and he had come to see it as the best money he'd ever spent. His credit score had taken a temporary dip from the settlement, but had already rebounded stronger than ever, a testament to his fiscal discipline. He had channeled the cold fury of that winter into his work. With the money from the sale of the Ardmore house, he had made a down payment on a new work van, a proper Ford Transit, and officially incorporated his own business, Hayes Heating and Cooling, LLC. He hired a young, eager apprentice from a local trade school, a kid named Leo, who reminded Marcus of himself at 20. Business was good. People valued his honesty and his skill. He wasn't just fixing furnaces anymore. He was building something of his own, brick by brick, job by job. In the corner of his living room, on a small shelf, sat a simple black frame. It didn't hold a picture. It held a crisp, new $1 bill. It was from his very first solo job as an independent contractor, a simple furnace cleaning for an elderly woman in his new neighborhood. She had paid him in cash, and he had saved the first dollar, a tangible symbol of his new beginning. Next to it sat a small, thriving succulent, a gift from his mother, a reminder that life can grow even in the toughest conditions. The garden in his tiny backyard was tilled and ready for planting. He was putting down roots, real ones this time. This morning, amidst the usual stack of bills and junk mail, there was a single, handwritten envelope. The return address was a cramped apartment in a less desirable part of Delaware County. The handwriting was Denise's. He hadn't heard from her in almost 10 months. He opened it with a utility knife, his movements calm and deliberate. The letter was short. Marcus, I don't expect you to read this, and I don't deserve for you to. I just wanted to say that I am sorry. Not for the divorce, but for everything before it. For not seeing you, for not appreciating you. For that night. I was a coward, and I was cruel. I chose my parents' pride over my husband's heart, and I will live with that for the rest of my life. I hope you have found peace. Denise. He read the letter twice. There was no surge of anger, no triumphant satisfaction. There was only a quiet, final sense of release. He folded the single sheet of paper and placed it in a drawer. It was a part of his past, and he was done living there. The forgiveness he had found wasn't for her. It was for him. It was the final piece of baggage to buy bound he needed to set down so he could truly move on. He finished his coffee, rinsed the mug in the sink, and looked out at the sunny Philadelphia street. He had learned a hard lesson, one that cost him a decade of his life and a significant amount of money. He learned that true wealth has nothing to do with a $900 cashmere sweater or a $4,200 a month apartment. It's not about the things you can buy, but the things you can't. True wealth is self-respect. It's the quiet dignity of a job done well. It's the warmth of a home where you are loved and valued, not just tolerated. It's the freedom to walk away from people who think your worth can be measured by the car you drive or the price tag on your watch. They had tried to put him in a box, to label him and put him on a shelf, but they had underestimated him. They had mistaken his kindness for weakness, his practicality for a lack of ambition. They never understood that the man who knows how to build things also knows how to take them apart, and sometimes the only way to build a new life is to be willing to dismantle the old one, right down to the foundation. We often stay in situations long after we know they're broken, out of love, loyalty, or fear. When was a time you finally stood up for yourself, even when it was the hardest thing to do? Share your moment of strength in the comments below. Your story could be the inspiration someone else needs to see today. Let's build a community that values dignity over dollars.